I'm going to talk to you about a feasibility RCT called Pickup that we recently completed in Manchester. And what we were doing in this study was randomizing women with preterm preeclampsia to 6 months treatment with postnatal enalapril or placebo, trying to improve their cardiovascular function and remodeling. So just to give you a bit of background, we know that preeclampsia is associated with postnatal cardiovascular dysfunction and long-term cardiovascular disease. And this has been identified as an important research topic by the James Lind Alliance, as mentioned previously today. We know that women with preterm preeclampsia, so those requiring delivery before 37 weeks, are at particular risk, with up to 8-fold risk of dying from cardiovascular disease. And despite all of this, to our knowledge, to date, no studies have investigated if this is modifiable. And this was really the rationale for the Pickup study. So this figure just illustrates the participant journey. So we recruited 60 women to the interventional arm with 1-to-1 allocation of enalapril to placebo. We also recruited an additional 40 women to the observational arm. So these women underwent the same main research visits, but weren't randomized to any intervention. So the visits took place within 3 days of delivery, 6 weeks and 6 months postpartum. And they consisted of having echocardiography, blood pressure measurements, arteriography, and bloods for cardiovascular and placental biomarkers. I'm only going to touch very briefly on the observational arm results, but I just wanted to highlight how prevalent cardiovascular abnormalities were at 6 months in the absence of cardioprotection. So 3/4 of the women had raised total vascular resistance, and nearly 3/4 of the women had diastolic dysfunction defined by the British Society of Echocardiography. And nearly half of the women had new hypertension at 6 months. There was a lot of overlap between these echocardiography abnormalities, but importantly and interestingly, there was only one woman in the whole cohort had a completely normal echo at 6 months. So now back to the interventional study. We've got some process outcomes, and what we demonstrated was that the study was feasible. So we recruited ahead of time, and 71% of those who were eligible were recruited, and of those, 67% completed the study at 6 months. Interestingly, about 80% of the women who didn't complete withdrew within the first 6 weeks, and this was during particularly hectic time of the postnatal period, and it provided us with important information to guide the design of future postnatal studies. We demonstrated that the intervention was acceptable, and all of the women who completed the study said that they'd be interested in taking it in the future if it was found to be beneficial. And compliance was broadly good, and we measured this via a number of different ways. Urinary enalapril was detectable in 85% of the enalapril arm at 6 weeks and 63% at 6 months. And we also looked at verbal recall, and missed doses were comparable between the two groups at 6 weeks and 6 months. So this just describes the baseline characteristics of the interventional arm cohort. The groups were well matched, and interestingly, there was one in 4 of the women had pre-existing hypertension defined either prior to pregnancy or in the first 20 weeks. And 43% had no known risk factors for preeclampsia. It was quite a severe cohort, with nearly 3 in 4 women having severe features as defined by NICE, and over half of the singleton babies being born under the 3rd centile. This slide just demonstrates the difference of the echocardiography measures at 6 months between the enalapril and placebo groups. So there was no difference in total vascular resistance, nor was there any difference in systolic function. However, there was an improvement in remodeling in the enalapril group compared to placebo. So both the left ventricular mass index and relative wall thickness was improved in the enalapril group. So the hearts were less thick. There was also an improvement in diastolic function as measured by E to E prime, demonstrating that the women in the enalapril had less stiff hearts as well at 6 months compared with placebo. So what we can conclude is that preterm preeclampsia is associated with a high prevalence of cardiovascular impairment 6 months post-delivery, particularly in the absence of sort of targeted cardioprotection. A postnatal intervention is feasible and acceptable to women, and that our pilot data supports a larger RCT to confirm the effect of postnatal enalapril on cardiovascular dysfunction and remodeling. So finally, what's next? We are in the process of planning a larger multi-centre RCT in partnership with A.Pec, and are due to be submitting that for funding applications next month. So if your hospital would be interested in taking part in the future, please do get in touch. And if you'd like to know a bit more about the feasibility RCT results, this has recently been published in Hypertension, so you can access the paper either by looking it up online or via the QR code there. And finally, I'd just like to thank everyone who was involved in the pickup study, and in particular, Jenny Myers, who is my supervisor and the chief investigator of the study. Thank you.